common.
I've been meaning to do this for a long time, since I had done a video on Fear, another masterpiece done by Monolith, who also released another game within the same year, which was Condemned Criminal Origins, an atmospheric horror game that combines criminal investigations along with the brutality of its combat, all situated in a down and dirty hellscape. It was originally released for the Xbox 360 as one of the launch titles for the new platform, a beginning of a new age of gaming that would come. The PS2, the GameCube, and the Xbox were still kicking it at this stage, but when they first showed this and a number of other titles like Dead Rising and Need for Speed Most Wanted, Microsoft wanted to make sure that they'd kickstart the new generation with a bang, and this was the start of the HD generation. At this time, I still had the PS2, and I first discovered this game in a magazine issue from K-Zone, which was basically a magazine for pop culture stuff. A lot of it was gaming as far as I could remember, or as far as I was interested in when I was a kid. I saw this game and a few other launch titles back when the 360 was on its way in 2005. Unfortunately, I never got the console around that time, but I did within a few years after the game's release, and I experienced it, and boy was it something that I wouldn't forget. Just another reminder that there will be spoilers for this video, so if you have not played this game yet, stop watching this video now. Upon seeing the screenshots and the title cover of the game, it would appear to be more of a crime game, and the thing is, you would be right, because the majority of the game and its story is centered around solving the circumstances you're stuck in. You play as Agent Ethan Thomas, an agent of the SCU has been sent down to a rough neighborhood investigating a murder. And right off the bat, the atmosphere is already intense. You find the body, you bring out your gadgets getting to the bottom of things. Things proceed as expected until you're interrupted by noises upstairs and, well, let's just say that things get out of hand pretty quickly.
Hey, Pete! I know you're down here!
Federal agent, come out peacefully or I will use force.
Fuck you!
After being sent by the other officer to turn the power on, you shoot your way through a few enemies, reach the controls, and you lose your gun in the dumbest way possible. In retrospect though, I think it was just an excuse to introduce you to the game's combat. The game's actual combat being the melee part, to be specific. You play whack-a-mole with a bunch of nameless lunatics while they do the same. You then get beat up by the suspect, the two officers die, you get thrown out of the window, and welcome to the rest of the fucking game. So Condemned Criminal Origins is one of those games that doesn't let go of its insatiable desire to keep you in a state of paranoia and tension. From beginning to end, you'll be slogging your way through the hellish metropolis that makes Chicago look like Disneyland in comparison. Before each level, you get to read short documents detailing new articles of dead birds, or the unnaturally large crime rate that's increasing day by day. And the story of Condemned is something that becomes more interesting and terrifying at the same time when you piece things together. So while your character begins to unravel the suspect's motives and what that person is trying to do, you begin to notice a lot of strange and uncanny situations as well as reports as to what's going on in the city. For starters, you can pick up collectibles like metal objects and birds. So why birds and metal objects and the scribbling that you see on the wall? What does it all mean? Why is everyone so violent? Why is the domestic violence crime rate up 114%? What's the deal with these guys? Questions that will pop up in your head in this game most likely. In contrast to Fear, Condemned doesn't necessarily give you all of the answers, and some of the most important questions go unanswered, but you can also ignore all of the paranormal details and just focus on beating the shit out of the game's enemies, snapping their neck with a crunch that sounds like the chips I ate, ramming or punching them when you take them down, or just beating them with like wood planks, pipes, conduits, whatever you've got really. Axes, sledgehammers, so on and so forth. There's a treat here for both groups. Those with an interest in the story and those that don't think too much and just focus on the gameplay and that's it. So the story itself is somewhat incomplete, but the interesting and mysterious aspects of the background lore when you piece it together, as well as the atmosphere and the gnarly nature of the game's setting, do more than make up for it. The characters themselves don't really have a lot to work with for the most part. We don't learn a great deal about them either. Rosa, who is your assistant throughout the game, who also explains what you give to her when you pick up evidence, she's just kind of there for the most part. As I said, she just provides forensic insight into the findings when you collect evidence, so we can just figure out what we just did and what we just gave to her. Another central character who does help you throughout the game on and off is a character called Malcolm Van Horn, with an agenda of his own, and of course, the suspect himself, who is running amok, crossing out the city's known killers as you try to reach out to them as well. The writing of the game is pretty sharp, and nails the criminal investigation element during the experience, which is carried out by phone calls, using one of your gadgets to collect evidence, sending the data, then being told what it is, so to speak. The main plot points are tracking down the killer to clear your name, as well as figuring out what the fuck is going on in the city, and why almost every single person you meet just wants to kill you, or each other. Condemned is on the surface an action crime thriller, so to speak, when you look at it from a story, or just a screenshot sort of perspective, but when you play the game and progress further into the story and put the pieces together, that's when it turns more into a horror game, dealing with an entity or a force of nature you can't quite understand that is somewhat influencing the events of the city, but what we know for sure is that there is a lot going on in the background that we don't know about yet. So yeah, Condemned Criminal Origins is one of those games that's not going to explain everything from beginning to end, kind of like what the first Fear game does, where we have all the pieces, the story from beginning to end is told, all the mystery is solved. In this game, that's not the case, but I actually like it this way because the unknowable aspects of what we're dealing with makes it even more terrifying. So like what we face at the end may only just be the tip of the iceberg, and maybe not even that. But again, you eventually assume that something is seriously wrong. And I mean, just look at the fucking percentage of the domestic violence crime rate. I mean, it's 114%. 114%. And the number of birds dying is also another factor in this unusual situation. The circumstances around this whole shit show has infected so much of the city that most of the populace have been reduced to feral individuals, armed with guns, 4x4 wood, steel pipes, conduits, axes, sledgehammers, crowbars, pistols, shotguns, rifles, submachine guns, etc. All of them come at you like a dog with rabies, and they're all in your face. The levels carry the same consistent feeling, never feeling at ease, always tense. From an apartment complex to the metro, the subway, the scariest fucking level in the game, Bart's department store, and more. The game is about 10 levels long, but feel pretty long except for this one. In the first Fear, you would see a lot of the same places most of the time, and the tension would go on and off. Like, I would say that the tension was more apparent in the paranormal sections when Alma came at you, and with the replicas, well, it just became more or less like a John Woo slow-mo sort of gun fu movie. In Condemned, it's there, all the time. Your movement is significantly slower, you're more vulnerable due to the fact that your stamina bar fucking sucks and you can only carry one weapon at a time. Technically there's two since you have the taser, which I will get into later. But all in all, the levels are vastly different in terms of scenery, and you have enemies unique to each level too. So to survive this hellfest of a crime-ridden game, you need to know two things. The infinite taser that recharges every couple of seconds, and the differences between the weapons you pick. They're all categorized by 4 different attributes: damage, speed, block, and reach. Each weapon of course have their own trade-offs. Some are fast or slow, short or long, etc. You break it down to your preferences and go from there. But sometimes you'll have to switch to certain weapons like the shovel, or the crowbar, or the fire axe, the sledgehammer in order to progress through a level, whether it's opening a cabinet, smashing a lock, breaking down a door, etc. Then you have the firearms themselves, which are quite helpful, provided you have enough ammo, as in enough bullets, because there's no ammo to pick up afterwards. The guns range from a handgun to a revolver, a shotgun, a double barrel, submachine gun, a rifle. But once you run out of bullets, it's effectively useless. The only way you can keep using that weapon is if you find another one. Either way, there's no ammo, unless you count picking up another version of the same weapon. You can use them as a melee weapon though, but they're the only weapons in the game that can actually break upon usage, and to be honest, they're not that effective as a melee weapon anyway. You're just generally better off just replacing it either with another gun or another melee weapon. Generally, you'll use guns to cheese the more difficult fights, then toss it for a melee weapon to mop up the rest. But to be honest, the melee weapons are the star of this game here. While the firearms are useful, they don't feel as satisfying to use compared to, say, something like Fear. You also have your health, which is replenished by health kits. You'll find them in health cabinets or just lying around somewhere. You'll need them on the hard difficulty, because you can sometimes get one-shotted by enemies if they have the right weapon, or god forbid, a gun from a distance you can't quite reach in time. Combat is simple in form, but takes a while to nail down, from reading your opponent's random and wild attacks to the sudden surprises they can make, and successfully parrying their attacks. It can also be easy to screw up, and some weapons make parrying harder than others. Oftentimes, they'll go around a corner and hide, waiting for you to get close enough. Enemies with guns will keep their distance, while groups will go all over the shop, and one of them will beeline for you directly. The AI can be tricky, but it's nothing too complicated and honestly becomes predictable once you become familiar enough with the game. Your main utility that you can always rely on is the taser. It's something that can break the game at times, making some of the hairier fights trivial due to the fact that you can use it as many times as you want. There is, of course, a recharge duration to balance things out. Using the taser automatically points towards the nearest enemy or in the direction you're pointing it. At times it can be useful, especially if they have a gun, since you can take their weapon off of them and use it. Just be careful though, they have a tendency to tickle you to death if they don't have a weapon. In the library level, you can get an upgraded version of the weapon that's pretty OP. It stuns the enemies to the point that they fall to the ground, and then you can use this opportunity to one-shot them with a kick or just with any weapon that you have. The combat is one of my favorite things about this game. That and the minimalistic approach to its paranormal sections and the overall atmosphere of the game. You would be hard-pressed to find anything else like it, other than Fear or Condemned 2 Bloodshot, the sequel that would release a few years later. Monolith would use sound as another means to keep you on your toes. From the sounds of random noises, the shuffling of footsteps going across pipes or stairs, the mutterings and heavy breathing that you hear in the department store, the unusual clattering of metal. It's one of my favorite games when it comes to sound in horror games. Something that can be overlooked easily and can oftentimes make or break the suspense of a horror experience. Musically, it's pretty minimal here, aside from this catchy as fuck tune. Throughout the game, it's mostly a lot of ambience and noise that adds its layer of atmosphere throughout each level. Most of the time, you don't really notice it, but it works, and it doesn't interfere too much with the gameplay. Graphically, it's a game that's going on in years. Mind you though that this is a 2005 Xbox 360 launch title. Anyone that remembers the PS2 back in its heyday, back in 2000, a lot of those launch titles looked like absolute shit. And in retrospect, the same goes for the 360 launch titles too. But you can tell that it was somewhat more crispier than the 6th gen counterparts, but it had only just gotten started compared to what we would get in the later on years during the cycle of the 360 and the PS3. Everyone in this game either looks like they've been bulking or starving. The designs of the enemies go from feral to nightmarish, like the mannequin dudes at the department store, the kitchen lady in the school, or the little creatures that crawl on all fours. As for the central characters tied to the narrative, they look like they all go to the gym or something. In terms of environments, they share the same tone, but are great in variety. The text and the models of the melee weapons and the firearms are fairly clear. The textures elsewhere though are pretty muddy due to how dated the game is graphically. Considering its age though, you shouldn't have too much trouble running Condemned whatsoever on PC. It runs like a dream on mine, and, if you get any other computer, it'll be just the same. But if you have a working Xbox 360 copy, that'll work too. At the end of the day, Condemned Criminal Origins was a game made by a studio in their prime, who also in the same year made one of the best fucking shooters ever made, the first Fear. But Condemned, I found to be a more unique experience in my opinion, on how it combines the interesting aspects of forensics, detective work, simple but brutal combat, and gradually morphs it all into a horror game. Through its atmosphere, its flexible and terrifying designs of the enemies, and the minimal but effective presence of paranormal activities thinly layered throughout the game. Its story is not entirely developed though, or explained much, but the mystery and the background lore makes up for it, making overall a pretty interesting game in that sense. It makes good use of the unknown and raises questions as to what's going on and why, even if none of those questions go entirely answered. Condemned 2 Bloodshot, however, would further expand on the mystery and outright explain everything. And while that game was also really good, I did still prefer the ambiguous nature of the first game more, especially in how it approached its own narrative. Either way though, Condemned Criminal Origins is one of the best horror games you will ever play, and like I said, you will be hard pressed to find anything like it at all. Thank you for watching.